Hi everyone. I'm going to start by reading an extract from an article about immigrant-police interactions. This is a quote from a police officer. "I remember pulling over many people and they'd just be sweating and you're thinking they've got drugs on them, they've got something on them. But it was just because they were so nervous from their previous experience in their home country." Research has demonstrated that many immigrants mistrust Australian police. I'm going to look today at this issue through a particular lens, a construct known as police legitimacy. Police legitimacy is the extent to which people believe police authority is justified and should be deferred to and obeyed. The notion is an extension of Max Weber's theory that force alone is inadequate to maintain law and order. On a more practical level, police legitimacy is important insofar as it can predict willingness to cooperate with police, to report victimisation, and to call police when in need. Now, in Australia, most of the research on police legitimacy has looked at its relationship to procedural justice. Procedural justice refers to the quality of treatment and decision-making people receive from authorities. In a series of highly cited studies, the Queensland researchers Christina Murphy and Adrian Cherney demonstrated that perceptions of procedural justice predict attitudes towards police legitimacy. But they consistently found differences between ethnic minorities and the general population. Now, what this boiled down to is that for ethnic minorities, procedurally just encounters with police are not enough to change pre-existing attitudes about legitimacy. Why may this be the case? There have been numerous attempts at answering this question. For instance, in 2015, Oliveira et al. Conducted a study in Queensland. It concluded that social identity was a stronger predictor of police attitudes than either race or ethnicity. In other words, members of ethnic minorities with a strong identification to Australian culture were more likely to see police in a positive light than members with a weak identification. The Oliveira study conflated all ethnic minorities into a single category. Another way to approach the topic would be to focus on individual ethnicities. This would be with a view to identifying specific cultural variables that may underpin attitudes towards police. Now, this is where the proposed study comes in. It will look specifically at the Australian Indian community. Why the Indian community? Because 7.4% of Australia's population was born in India. Indians make up the third largest foreign-born group in Australia, behind New Zealanders and Chinese. And on a more personal note, I lived and worked in India for 3 years. I have no Indian heritage, but some understanding of the diverse values, beliefs and attitudes that make up the tapestry of Indian society. So, what does the research tell us specifically about Indian attitudes towards Australian police? In one study, Sargent et al. Examined the relationship between procedural justice and police legitimacy. The sample included 137 people of Indian heritage from Queensland and Victoria. The authors found that procedural justice was less effective in fostering cooperation with police among the Indian ancestral group than the general population. In another study, Shiva Subramaniam looked at perceptions of police racism among minority groups enrolled at UNSW. All participants were asked to rate the extent to which police were prejudiced against their own cultural group. The Indian students reported higher levels of perceived prejudice than the Japanese and African American students, but lower levels than the Chinese and Aboriginal students. In yet another study, Singh et al. Interviewed Indian students who'd recently arrived in Melbourne. Some participants charged police with failing to follow up racist attacks and treating victims as perpetrators. By way of theory, there are numerous ones that may be applicable to the proposed research. Firstly, there's the integrated threat theory. It posits that feelings of threat arise from negative stereotypes. According to this theory, some Indians may have formed negative police stereotypes in India that may have been transferred into an Australian context. Do you recall the police officer I quoted earlier on? She thought a similar process had played out among some people she pulled over. The research may also be underpinned by Hofstadter's cultural dimensions theory, namely the dimension known as power distance. Power distance relates to attitudes towards authority and the extent to which social inequalities are tolerated within a society. Hofstadter reported that India was a nation with high power distance. Finally, there's legitimacy theory. It predicts that global attitudes towards police as an institution shape behaviour on specific occasions. To sum up, research suggests that among ethnic minorities, fair and just encounters with police are not enough to change attitudes concerning legitimacy. To date, Australian studies have only attempted to explain this phenomenon using broad brushstrokes, that is, by combining all immigrants into a single category. What's missing from the canon is fine detail, research on how specific ethnic minorities conceptualise police power and the processes and experiences that underpin such conceptualisations. Still, other gaps exist in the body of research on relations between Australian police and people of Indian heritage. This is a field of inquiry that remains sparse. So the research question is, how does the Indian immigrant experience influence assessments of police legitimacy?